Lorena Gallo was born October 31st, 1970, in Buque, Ecuador. Her home life was incredibly modest, and though her family were not affluent by any means, they got by to the best of their abilities. Her parents, in particular, told Lorena that though things were hard, they could always make things better for themselves through hard work and determination. Growing up in the small household, Lorena dreamed of one day having more for herself. She would often watch TV and place herself within the alternate realities. Notably, she became enamored with the notion of living in the United States, as most of her favorite shows were set there. She idealized the notion of living in the US, believing that it was truly the land of opportunity, and that if she got the opportunity to move there, life would simply fall into place. As a gift for her quinceañera, her parents took her on a short trip to the US, where she fell even more in love with the country. Her mind was made up, and shortly after high school, she would make the move. Lorena moved to the United States on a student visa and began attending community college in Virginia. She spoke little English at the time, and those closest to her would describe her as being naive to the ways of the world, but she was determined to build a life for herself in the States. She wanted a nice home and a white picket fence, and she was more than happy to work towards that goal herself. But she was also a young woman on her own for the first time who believed in love stories. She often talked to friends about wanting to find a man to sweep her off her feet, to be her partner when times were tough, and to build a life together. At the time, she had never even been in a proper relationship, and held on to the hope of finding the perfect guy. While attending college, Lorena began to work for a woman named Jana Bisutti. Lorena would describe Jana as a maternal figure in her life, helping her navigate through young adulthood and giving her a shoulder to cry on whenever she needed it. She worked for Jana as a nanny, as well as working alongside her as a manicurist. It was through Jana that Lorena could fully realize her dreams, as Jana was a self-made businesswoman. She had a nice home, nice cars, boats, and more, and, to the young woman, had the perfect life. And Jana was more than happy to share her knowledge with Lorena. However, things would take a turn for the worst when Lorena would meet John Bobbitt. Welcome back to another episode of Dreading, or if this is your first time here, welcome. Today we are going to be covering the case of Lorena Bobbitt, and how the media firestorm around this case has somewhat diluted the story of what actually happened. This case has widely been requested for us to cover, as many people who are well acquainted with the case details feel it has been misconstrued by the corporate press and other sources. As always, it is our hope that we cover this case as closely as possible, with as much respect as possible. If there is a case you would like to see us cover, or a story you would like to bring more attention to, let us know by emailing us at dreading.official@gmail.com. We are constantly sorting through emails, adding more cases to the list of stories to cover, and it's our ultimate goal to cover every case that's sent our way. With that being said, it's important to note that we still have about 4,000 emails to get through, meaning that we can't respond or create content as quickly as you might want. With all of that said, let us begin. John Bobbitt was born March 23, 1967, and faced hardship from the moment he came into the world. His father was not in the picture, and his mother was a drug addict who often struggled to provide for herself, much less for her sons, leading to them often being homeless. When John was just 3 years old, he and his 2 brothers would be taken out of his mother's custody and placed in the care of his aunt, who had 4 sons of her own. Their home life was chaotic, with John describing himself as the de facto peacemaker in the home. That statement would conflict greatly with others' recollection of his behavior at the time, but John would state that he had always been the kind of guy to make sure that everyone else was okay, even at his own expense. John's recollection of his life prior to the Marines was often strange, with him giving conflicting statements to various reporters, while also displaying signs of annoyance and aggression when the questions come up. With that in mind, not much is known about his life prior to meeting Lorena, and what is known is widely contested. After high school, John would make the ultimate decision to join the Marine Corps. According to multiple statements, he didn't have a real reason for joining, beyond the fact that one of his friends had joined the year prior, and said he should do it as well. He regarded the choice as being almost boring, as if joining was a thing to do when nothing else was happening. But, at least for the people around him, they stated that the Marines gave John a purpose, and it was through the Marines that he would meet Lorena. In the years since, Lorena has talked about the night she met John as being somewhat magical. They both attended the Marine Corps ball, her with a female friend and him by himself. John saw her standing with a friend, looking, quote, innocent and naive, unquote, and decided to talk to her. Their conversation was stilted, as she didn't know a lot of English, but she thought he was handsome and gallant. In her eyes, he was the perfect gentleman, dancing with her and treating her with the utmost respect that night. However, when he would recall the events in 2019 to ABC News, he would state that he liked how naive and unassuming Lorena was, as she didn't know English, and he thought talking to her was amusing, because she didn't understand most of what he was saying. He felt that because of the language barrier, he could more or less take charge in the relationship, more so than he had with any woman who could speak fluent English, and that she would be, in a way, forced to rely on him. How John would describe their relationship was not unlike how predators we have covered describe their relationship with minors. They try to gloss over the power dynamic by using choice words like naive, innocent, unassuming, because that is deemed as more appropriate. Lorena was a young woman in a new country, but she wasn't stupid. She was fully capable of taking care of herself, as she had been before John came into her life. But it would seem that he was attracted to the idea of her being somewhat subservient to him. 9 months into the relationship, the pair would get married. Their stories about the proposal conflict, with John stating that it was a marriage of convenience, because her green card was expiring and she wanted to stay in the country. When pressed further about if he married her because he loved her, he would state that, quote, he thought he did, unquote. He said that Lorena proposed to him over dinner with her mother while crying, and he accepted. However, Lorena would state that they discussed getting married openly, and that they had mutually agreed to wed so that they could continue their relationship. They would go on to have a small ceremony, with their friends and family all gathered around them. Both parties would describe the day as being beautiful, but their relationship would quickly take a turn, though once again, they would state this occurred for different reasons. John would state that shortly after the pair got married, Lorena suddenly became controlling and aggressive with him, in a way that she had never been before. He claimed that almost every night, she became incredibly jealous towards any woman he was around, accusing him of cheating on her for as little as looking in the direction of another woman. It was later shown that he had cheated on Lorena multiple times throughout their relationship and marriage, even fathering a child with another woman. Lorena, he said, would fly into a rage, striking him in the face repeatedly and screaming at him over slight misunderstandings, and things would only get worse when he left the Marine Corps. In 1991, John was discharged from the Marines, and Lorena expected him to get a new job. She was still working for Jana as a nanny and a manicurist, and thought that John's skills from the Marines would easily translate into a safer, more stable position. But the opposite was true. The Marines had provided structure for John, and without it, he found it impossible to hold down any job. There are varying reports as to why, with some online articles stating that he would routinely show up for work drunk or high, or not show up at all, while others stated he had stolen from multiple jobs. However, to be clear, all we can state factually is that he was repeatedly fired shortly after being hired from a number of jobs, making Lorena the full-time breadwinner. In multiple interviews, John appears unable to remember this detail himself, instead stating that somehow he was holding down 3 jobs at a time to fund Lorena's lavish lifestyle and, quote, gold-digging tendencies, unquote. That cannot be the case, though, based solely on court record and John's own testimony at the time. In response to Lorena's aggression and abuse, John would state that he was forced to put his hands on his wife, if only to calm her down and protect himself. How far he went with putting his hands on his wife would change from retelling to retelling, with him sometimes stating that he struck her in the face, while other times denying he went further than simply holding her down. Pausing just for one moment, I do want to state that when we cover cases such as this one, where there are 2 stories about what occurred, we always attempt to tell both sides of the story without any bias. Our goal is often to relay all the information as clearly as possible, so that those viewing can make up their own minds. Should you believe one party over the other, it would be based solely on the information they provided, and not by our statements. To do this, we often gain access to court documents in the case, and watch every available interview with each party, and use their own words when describing what occurred. However, we're having a difficult time doing that in this case, as after watching countless interviews with John, his story changes relatively often. At the time of recording, John would make a public statement less than a month ago that would directly conflict with previous statements. We cannot parse out which statements or events he wants to put forward, because he has said so many contradicting things throughout the years. It would be irresponsible for us to give only one version of events he has put forward in this case, but it also can feel as if we are being biased by noting that almost everything he has said has been debunked by his own statements. Never before have we had to put a statement like this in a video, and we're only doing so now because it's extremely difficult to present this case in our usual way. Lorena would later state that their relationship changed nearly a month after marriage, after attending a party with John. As they drove back to their apartment, she alleged that John began to drive erratically out of anger, swerving across the road and accelerating well past the speed limit. She claimed she admonished him and tried to get him to slow down, going so far as to reach over the passenger seat to try and steady the steering wheel. However, when she did so, he allegedly punched her in the face. She was shocked by the assault, as he had never hit her before, and had no idea how to proceed. Following that incident, she would claim that he would routinely strike her, as well as hold her down and hit her for any perceived slight. John would claim that after they married, Lorena's marital desires ramped up, with her wanting to live more like her boss, Jana. He said that her influence on Lorena was entirely negative, with his wife making reckless and irresponsible financial decisions in order to fit in with her employer. He described her as being stubborn and selfish, always wanting to move on to the next big thing, while he felt they should live within their means. However, when pressed about what exactly his wife wanted that was so far out of their budget, John would cite her desire to move from an apartment into a home, which Lorena had always said she wanted. Again, it should be pointed out that at this time, John had no stable income, while Lorena had two, making his assertion that she was using him for money or being financially irresponsible a bit hard to believe. Friends of both parties would state that the relationship was abusive, offering different perspectives as to who was at fault for the abuse. John's friends would claim that Lorena was aggressive and difficult, and that John had claimed she had chased him with a pair of scissors one night over a perceived slight. However, they would also allege that on multiple occasions, John had bragged about abusing Lorena and forcing her into sex. Meanwhile, Lorena's friends took pictures of her after their fights, showcasing Lorena's injuries and proving that she had been struck, although not by who. The two would call the police on each other often, both telling the responding officers that the other was abusing them. Lorena had a hard time talking to the police, though, as she was still learning English, and would struggle to tell them exactly what happened. John, however, would use his status as a former Marine to gain favor with the officers, citing that his wife was just crazy, and he would get a handle on her. When the police would eventually leave, Lorena claimed that John's response was, quote, "Once a Marine, always a Marine," unquote, and that the cops would always listen to him over her. On one occasion, the responding officers did arrest John and charge him with assault and battery. This event never occurred according to John, who was recently quoted as saying that he was never charged with abusing Lorena officially, which proves that it never happened and that she's a liar. In response to being arrested and charged with assault and battery, John filed his own complaint against Lorena and had her charged as well. Neither party would pursue action against the other, and the charges were dropped. This wasn't Lorena's only run-in with the law, as she had been caught shoplifting from Nordstrom's during the relationship. She also had stolen nearly $7,000 from her boss, Jana, over the course of their working relationship. Lorena would state that the money she had stolen over time had been to make up for John's own expenses and his inability to help with finances, although John would rebuff this claim by stating he was actively working 3 jobs at the time. This was not true, and it's unclear why he continues to state this. Jana didn't fire her nanny and friend, and instead worked out a way for Lorena to pay her back, with increased interest. However, these issues would only cause more stress and aggravation in her relationship with John. Lorena would state that the abuse carried over into their intimate relationship, with him regularly forcing himself onto her to participate in brutal, often violent sex. She would tell John that she didn't want to have sex with him, that she didn't like it when he put his hands on her, but that did little to stave the former Marine off. At the time, the idea of marital rape, or that a wife could revoke consent during sex, was considered to be outlandish, so much so that the following was written in Philadelphia Daily News. Rape in marriage. When I first heard the phrase some years ago, I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it struck me as being goofy. How could a husband rape his own wife? Did he not have a right to sexual intercourse with her as a result of the marriage bond? Wasn't he merely helping her to perform her wifely duties? I remember being taught that when 2 people got married, they surrendered themselves to each other. It was a mutual giving and taking, so that a wife's body, sexually speaking, was no longer her own to do with as she pleased. The collective cultural mind reflected that thought process, with marital rape only being criminalized in 1993, a month after this case would gain notoriety. At times, John's own viewpoint would mimic that quote we provided earlier, as he would state that Lorena could not revoke consent as she was his wife, therefore he never assaulted her. However, like the majority of things John would state, he would go back and forth, at times saying he'd never had violent sex with her, to saying that he did, but she happily participated. Later on, his friends would testify in court that John often bragged, quote, about how he liked to force Lorena to have sex and how he controlled and dominated her, adding credibility to her claims. Lorena would state as much as she didn't like her relationship with John and how it devolved, but she had made vows and intended to keep them. She was raised Catholic. She knew that divorce was looked down upon, and she thought that if they both worked on their relationship, it could go back to being as beautiful as it was in the beginning. But then she became pregnant. Lorena had always wanted to be a mother. As much as she wanted a nice house and a white picket fence, she always saw herself as being a homemaker. She thought at first that a child would provide an appropriate motivation for John to get a steady job and work on their relationship, but instead, the notion of having a child seemed to anger him. He told Lorena that she was not fit to be a mother, and he knew of a clinic that could help her, quote, get rid of the problem, unquote. Lorena argued with John, telling him that she thought she would be a good mother, and that she didn't want to get an abortion, but he told her if she were to have the child, he wouldn't be a part of its life. Lorena would end up going through with the abortion, despite the fact that she believed it was the wrong thing to do. She would state in court that while at the abortion clinic, John was less than comforting, taunting his wife for her fear and anxiety, and telling her that she was going to die in the procedure. This decision weighed heavily on her, and she stated she didn't want to bring a child into the world that wasn't wanted, but afterwards, she became severely depressed. Those closest to her talked about her shift in demeanor after the procedure, and how she was no longer the woman they had come to know. She told neighbors and friends about what had happened, how John would routinely hit her, how he had pressured her to get an abortion, and how she felt that he was raping her. I say felt as again, the public consensus about marital rape was that it wasn't real. While some people she talked to comforted Lorena and told her that what she was describing was rape, others brushed her off, again stating that a wife cannot revoke consent from her husband, even if he becomes violent during the act. Her work began to suffer, with Jana getting complaints about Lorena's hands shaking while she was painting her clients' nails, and Lorena often fighting back tears while with clients. She began to have trouble sleeping, unable to feel safe in her own home, either about John assaulting her or about her unborn child. According to John and his brother Bobby, while Lorena was going through this severe depression, John told her that they should get a divorce. He claims that she was deeply incensed and upset by this statement, and that she, quote, begged and pleaded with him to stay with her, but that he was done with the relationship, as it were. His brother would go on to state that, from his perspective, Lorena had lost control over John. Him leaving was a sign that her American dream was over, which would later account for the attack. Eventually, Lorena would seek medical intervention for her depression, but upon talking to her doctors, they too encouraged her to leave her marriage and seek an order of protection from John. On June 22nd, Lorena would walk into her local police department and ask to get an order of protection, but after realizing how long it would take, she left. But everything would change just 24 hours later. On June 23, 1993, John Bobbitt would return to their shared apartment after a night out drinking with a friend. He would allege that the friend had come over the day before to help him prepare to move out, so they could both move on with their lives, although his actions later on would seemingly negate that being the truth. Both parties would state that after a night out drinking, John came home to the shared apartment and woke Lorena up. According to Lorena, John came into the bed and began to assault her, refusing to take no for an answer. She repeatedly tried to get him off of her, but he held her down and raped her. As always, John told multiple versions of what had occurred that night, all of them conflicting. In some retellings, he would state that they didn't have sex that night, that he came home, got into bed next to Lorena, and went to sleep. In other statements, he would say that when he came home, Lorena approached him wanting to have sex, and he denied her, stating he was too drunk, which upset her. In others, he would state that they did have sex, but she was the instigator. According to Lorena, after John finished, he passed out in their bed. As she laid next to him, her mind tried to process the trauma she had just been put through. She had been battered and abused for years, forced to undergo an abortion she didn't want, and she felt trapped. She had gone to the police repeatedly and they did nothing. She got out of their bed to get a glass of water to calm herself down, but once in the kitchen, she grabbed a knife off of the counter. She then went back to the bedroom, pulled off the sheets of her inebriated husband, and cut off over half of his penis. Lorena then left the apartment with both the penis and her knife in hand. She described being in a daze, unable to properly think of what she was going to do or where she was going to go. Lorena would tell ABC News that she didn't recognize what she had done, and that while driving, was unable to understand that she still had his member in hand. Annoyed and confused as to why driving was so difficult, she looked down at her hand, and when she saw the severed appendage, she screamed and threw it out the window in shock. Shortly thereafter, the fog was lifted and the young woman realized what she had done. She immediately stopped and called emergency services, confessing that she had cut off her husband's penis and thrown it out of her car window. She gave a rough estimate of where she believed it could be found, and directly admitted that she was responsible for what had happened. Lorena was immediately arrested and once again confessed to the police as to what she had done. She tried to explain to the police that John had assaulted her and had been abusive towards her for years at that point, but due to the language barrier, some of what she said was misconstrued by the public. Notably, she was quoted as saying, "He always have orgasm and doesn't wait for me to ever orgasm. He's selfish." This quote, when relayed to the public, created a media firestorm, with multiple people stating that Lorena had cut John's penis off because he was bad in bed. However, Lorena has clarified that what she meant was that John would force her to have sex and never waited until she was ready to have sex, and could have communicated that properly had a translator been present. While Lorena was talking to the police, a search was underway to locate his missing penis. Miraculously, they were able to find the appendage and reattach it after 9 hours of surgery. Lorena would be charged and tried for malicious wounding, and facing upwards of 20 years if found guilty. However, for once, John's actions benefited Lorena. While on the stand, Lorena tearfully recounted everything John had put her through, from the abortion to the sexual assaults to the violence, everything in graphic detail. Her lawyers argued that because of the severe, prolonged abuse and trauma she was subjected to, that when she cut John's penis off, she had not been in the right mind. The prosecution then put John on the stand in order to bolster their arguments. However, as he always did, he told conflicting stories, which could not all be true. He would state that he had never been physical with Lorena, then follow that up with a story about how he had been. When he was asked to explain the photos of Lorena with a busted lip and black eye, he would state that they were staged to make him look bad, and deny that the police had ever wanted to charge him with assault against his wife. When cross-examined, his story about the attack changed as well, going well against the physical evidence in the case. His own friends and family would take the stand and recount how John had abused Lorena in front of them multiple times. After 7 hours of deliberation, Lorena was found not guilty due to temporary insanity. She was still ordered to undergo a 45-day mental health evaluation, at which point she was released back to the public. John Bobbitt had been charged, tried, and acquitted of marital rape. His lawyer argued that Lorena was jealous and scared of their marriage ending, so she concocted a story to make John look bad and attacked him to keep him subservient to her. But that is far from where the story ends. To say this case was widely reported on would be an understatement. Both John and Lorena were bona fide celebrities when the case went to trial, but how they dealt with their newfound infamy differed greatly. After the trial, Lorena changed her last name back to Gallo and decided to stay in the Virginia area, stating that she didn't want to uproot her entire life, as that would be letting John take another thing away from her. She shied away from any sort of fame, stating that she didn't feel right being in the spotlight. In 1997, Lorena was arrested and charged for assaulting her mother. According to witnesses, Lorena attacked her mother while she was watching television, but was acquitted of the charges. In 2007, she created the Lorena's Red Wagon Foundation to help victims of domestic abuse. In 2018, she renamed and relaunched the foundation as the Lorena Gallo Foundation, with the mission to expand domestic violence and sexual assault prevention education, as well as emergency response resources and community engagement activities that seek to improve outcomes for survivors and their children. Their website will be linked below, along with their Facebook page, should you want more information about their programs and how to help combat domestic violence. Lorena has appeared on a number of talk shows over the years, talking about how the case affected her, and discussing how she wants to use her unwanted notoriety to make things better for the next generation. In the midst of the turmoil that followed her relationship with John, Lorena went back to school where she met her partner, Dave Bellinger. Though she often refers to Dave as her husband, the pair are not married, despite being together for over 20 years. The couple has a daughter, and according to interviews they have given promoting her foundation, they are all happy and healthy. John is a different story. According to multiple sources, after the incident, John would form a band, comically titled The Severed Parts. Multiple outlets reported this band existed, but was disbanded when they failed to turn a profit. However, no songs can be found from the band, and the only proof that we were able to find that this band ever existed was a t-shirt of merchandise that is currently available on eBay. although this merch seems to be in reference to John's appearance on The Howard Stern Show. Enough reports exist stating that this band existed, or at the very least, was an idea that John publicized, but there is no actual evidence of any other members of this band or songs. It seems that this is just a popular rumor. It also seems more than likely that John made a joke about making this band or simply lied about it. I've also found no evidence that he can sing or play any instruments, again making this story harder to believe. John then went on to, of course, star in 2 adult films, to show people specifically that his penis still worked. In interviews he did after the trial, he was very determined to make sure that people knew that fact. The first film was John Wayne Bobbitt Uncut. Which was directed by Ron Jeremy and went on to win both the top-selling release of the year and top-renting release of the year. He tried in earnest to make porn a more stable career for himself, starring in another movie titled Frankenpenis. This film failed to garner the same amount of attention. It seemed that whatever curiosity the public had about John's penis had been assuaged and potentially even thwarted, and he could no longer, tragically, cash in the same way. It was also relevant that, though John had tried to paint Lorena as being crazy for believing he had cheated on her, he had fathered a child during their relationship with another woman. A year after his penis had been cut off, John would once again make headlines after assaulting his new 21-year-old fiancée. Christina Elliott and John had met months after his penis had been cut off, when he had traveled to Vegas for a personal appearance tour. Elliott was working as a topless dancer, and shortly thereafter, the pair were engaged. But at least in this relationship, John did not wait until marriage to become violent. He attacked Elliott twice, first on May 6, 1994, then a second time in July. Police were called both times, and found direct evidence that Bobbitt had assaulted the 21-year-old. Ultimately, John would get a slap on the wrists for both assaults, with him only serving 15 days in jail. John's name would appear back in the headlines a few years later, as he had been arrested for taking part in a theft. Reports from this time also note that he was working at a brothel in Nevada as a bartender, despite being hired as a chauffeur. According to his boss at the time, John seemed unable to keep his hands to himself, despite their policies. Bobbitt would be arrested again in November of 1999. Surprisingly, not for assault, but for harassment. John had been dating a 19-year-old named Desiree, who worked in the adult film industry. Like most of John's romantic relationships, it had been turbulent. John and Desiree had met at a brothel they were both working at the time. She was working as an escort while he was working as a greeter. The pair would move in together, and John would once again turn to violence. Desiree described an incident in the Amazon docuseries Lorena, where she told John that she wanted to take her name off the lease and leave him. She said, quote, "John flew off the handle, and he beat me with just about everything that was loose in the apartment. He forcibly took me onto the balcony and pushed me over the edge of the balcony, and was holding on to me by my lower legs, dangling me over the balcony, threatening to drop me. He kept Desiree in the apartment for 3 days. Brutalizing her the way he had done to his past romantic partners. She was able to escape, but John began harassing his ex-girlfriend. She eventually went to the police and filed charges against John for the harassment, but said nothing of the torture he put her through, feeling as though she would not be believed due to her work. As always, John claimed to be innocent, stating he was being unfairly attacked by another romantic partner due to his celebrity, and that Desiree was just cashing in on his infamy. However, a judge would find John guilty, and he would be ordered to discontinue all contact with his ex-girlfriend. John would go on to move back to Las Vegas, where he took a plethora of jobs and married a woman by the name of Joanna Farrell. After the two were wed, John began to go by the name John W. Farrell, seemingly to get away from any notoriety he still had, but little else changed. In May of 2002, the police would be called to the Farrell residence, where Joanna stated that John had pushed her down during an argument, resulting in a broken tailbone and finger. He was arrested and found guilty for the assault, and spent 15 months in prison over the incident. When he got out of prison, Joanna and him rekindled their relationship, but the abuse continued. In 2004, he would be charged with domestic battery, following an argument between Joanna, her 14-year-old son, and John. According to court documents, the 14-year-old found a sex toy in the home and confronted John and Joanna about it in front of multiple witnesses. The teen would testify that when he confronted his stepfather about the sex toy, John told him to, quote, hit him like a man, unquote, at which point the boy shoved him. John then pushed the boy to the ground and got on top of him. Joanna tried to get her husband off of her son, at which point either Joanna tripped over the pair and fell, injuring herself, or was pulled to the ground by John. She would tell the police that John had assaulted her the night of, but when she testified in court, she changed her story to say that she simply tripped. She would also file for divorce immediately after the alleged assault, but withdrew the filing before the case went to trial. Because of the differing stories, Bobbitt was found not guilty, with the judge in the case stating the assault was the teen's fault, because he was a brat. The pair would finally divorce each other later that year, following another incident where multiple witnesses saw John push Joanna down during an argument at his job. Once again, John would tell any media outlet that would listen to him that he was not a violent person, and that every single woman who had ever accused him of violence was simply cashing in on Lorena's original claims, and was desperately seeking their 15 minutes of fame. In 2009, Lorena and John appeared together on an episode of The Insider. John revealed that he still loved her and would routinely send her love letters and flowers, insisting that they get back together. He also apologized for his behavior towards her during the marriage, stating that he knows he didn't treat her right whilst they were together. He went even further to state that he forgave her for what she did to him, and he hopes that she could forgive him as well. Despite his apology, he maintained that he never meant to hurt her, and that he never cheated on her, but instead just wasn't aware of how sensitive she was, and how, quote, seriously she took things, unquote. However, years later, John would seemingly change his tune when he would post the following video.
Yeah, it's John Lee Bobbitt. It's coming up on 20 years. Can't believe it. 20 years ago, I went through a very terrible, tragic, horrifying situation with my ex-wife Lorena. And now I realize that, there's a lot of things that came up that never surfaced. And there's a lot of information that I have now that I can explain to people why that happened. And I think it's important for people to know the truth. Back then, I didn't know how to explain what happened because I didn't have, the resources. I didn't have the knowledge back then to understand what happened. But there's going to be a lot of things that I could talk about, and I got enough material to write a book. I've been actually 20 years ago. 20 years has passed, and I've done a lot of research on myself, and it's amazing when you look into it how much of the fiasco the whole thing was. The whole court trials and what she did and how she created a defense of the battered wife syndrome and all that. So, anyways, I got a lot of material, and hopefully we can talk about it.
Give an example. This is a story. Like, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. For example, a friend of hers came into the court to testify that she told her 3 years before she did it that she was going to cut my dick off because it would hurt me more than just killing me if I cheated on her. And so it was pretty much premeditated. 3 years before she did it, she had this evil thought in her head that if I left her or cheated on her, that she would cut my dick off because it hurt her more than just killing her, because she was hurt. She was hurt, but not physically, not rape or battery, emotionally. She was so emotionally hurt that she wanted me to hurt. That's an example, one of the many stories that I can tell. The things I got to tell people now is going to piss Lorena off, because I'm going to speak the truth, and people are going to know the truth, and it's going to make her mad. And believe me, when she gets mad, watch out. Yeah, 20 years ago, my wife cut my penis off. Why? I know why. I finally figured it out. She don't want people to know the truth, and I think it's important for people to know the truth. I think that's why her mother got mad at her, and she beat up her mother on Christmas, because she knew the truth. Allegedly, she beat up her mother on Christmas. I don't know what happened with that, but I believe her mother knows. She knows the truth about her daughter, and I think it's important. I want people to know the story. and it has never been properly told. My story has never been properly told to the public, and I have a lot of answers for any questions anybody may have. For more info, go to SofaKingCoolOnline.com. SofaKingCoolOnline.com.
6 years after posting the video, John would continue to harass Lorena online, this time by using her foundation's Facebook profile. His first post was in response to another person positively reviewing Lorena's foundation and praising Lorena herself. In response, he posted 2 stickers, one that says "okay" and one that has a thumbs up where the person has brass knuckles, which clearly indicates that he feels like punching this person with brass knuckles because of their praise of his ex-wife. He then wrote the following: "This girl Devin hit me on my bike on my way to work. She brought me to her house, and her mother and her put ointment on my wounds, then brought me to work and picked me back up from work and brought me to her house and let me use her girl's 10-speed. I had it at the apartment all weekend. Then my friend Robert Johnson showed up from Buffalo, New York. Early Sunday morning, that's when I told Lorena that I wanted a divorce and I was moving out, but she decided to move out. But she didn't go anywhere, she stayed in the apartment. Monday, Devin showed up with a new bike. Lorena didn't know who she was. She was pacing back and forth between the balcony window and the bedroom window, peering out. We exchanged bikes, and she invited me and my friend to a party. So apparently, this is the girl that Lorena thought I was leaving her for. Lorena was off work Sunday and Monday. Tuesday, everybody went to work. Me and Robert came home in the afternoon. I didn't have to work my second job, so we decided to go out before Lorena got home. We went to the nightclub, where I work across the street as a bouncer. I suggested going to the Holiday Inn because there was a band there, but we decided not to. Then we went to 2 other clubs, didn't drink that much, got tired and hungry, so stopped at Denny's, had a big breakfast and coffee. Got home at around 3:30 a.m. Very, very tired. Robert crashed on the couch. I folded up my clothes and went to sleep. Lorena was trying to talk, asking where I was all night. To make a long story short, I told her the Holiday Inn. We didn't even go to the Holiday Inn. There was some sexual play while I was trying to sleep, and there was some brief sex. She was still trying to talk. Are you happy you hurt my feelings again, and again? I didn't hear a word. She was referring to the 3 times that I left her. I left for 2 weeks, then I left for over a year. Now I made up my mind and was leaving her again. Then she took that knife and cut it off. Later on, when Lorena found out that I wasn't at the Holiday Inn and having an affair, she was very devastated with herself. She made a big mistake. I know rejection, abandonment, and infidelity are very painful, but that shouldn't have been a consequence anyways for having an affair, to cut a man's penis off. But she had to make up a story at Joanna's house and stick to it, and have a bunch of false witnesses come to testify during her trial. You want to know the truth, that's the truth, and Lorena knows it, and it's undisputable. And if you don't believe me, talk Lorena's mother, because I talk to her all the time, and her uncle, Ronald Patricio, Colonel. Yes, I know that happened to Lorena and her uncle many years ago. Following that, he went on a spree, replying to any post on her page with the same message, and attempting to show proof in the form of the screenshot of a legal document. He then posted his own review of her foundation, alongside this picture of him holding 2 children while wearing an inappropriate shirt. The caption reads, "I'm also a domestic violence survivor. Lorena Bobbitt cut my penis off because she thought I was having an affair at the Holiday Inn. Then she made up a story that I was abusive, which was proven to be false. Since then, he has gone between stating that he forgives her and wants nothing but the best for her to writing on Facebook that she should be deported and is an illegal immigrant. He also has talked to multiple small outlets, stating that the truth of what happened that night has not been told, and that he is sick of all the lies. Most recently, all of John's toes have been amputated due to him ingesting severely contaminated water while in the Marines. According to an interview he gave with The Sun a few months back, John was diagnosed with toxic peripheral polyneuropathy, which causes damage to the peripheral nervous system. According to Bobbitt, it caused him both nerve damage and osteomyelitis, a bone infection that leads to ulcers and requires skin grafts. He stated in April of this year, 2024, that he believes that the contaminated water and its lingering effects caused him to treat Lorena poorly during their relationship, and that he, quote, would have made better decisions, unquote, had he not ingested contaminated water. In that same interview, he stated that he wants closure from the situation, in the form of Lorena admitting that she lied about him abusing her. He claims, wrongfully, that there was and is no evidence that he was ever abusive, and that all he needs to move on from what happened is for her to come forward and state that she lied. He also stated he regrets how he treated her and wishes that they had worked it out so they could have had a family, which is a crazy thing to say when he admitted to telling her that she would be a bad mother and that she needed to get an abortion. While John repeats that no news outlet has ever reported the case clearly, he seems unable to recognize the fact that, at this point, that would be his own fault. He has changed his story countless times, and on his own Facebook profile goes between saying he forgives Lorena and believes that she was the woman he was destined to be with, and saying that she needs to be deported, and agreeing with comments of people saying that they should gouge her eyes out. He also never addresses the multiple other allegations beyond stating that these women were just looking for attention by accusing him of abuse. Even though there are multiple witnesses, even though there is evidence, as far as he's concerned, nothing ever happened, and everyone is being unfair towards him. As of today, this is where the case ends. Let me know what you think occurred in the comments down below. Do you think John was abusive towards Lorena? Do you think his continued posting is a sign of guilt or innocence? If there is a case you would like to see covered on our channel or a story you want to bring more attention to, you can let me know by emailing me at dreading.official@gmail.com. Have a good day and remember to stay safe.